From next year, when you get a car insurance quote or you renew it, you'll be asked for your driving licence number and the number of every named driver on the policy. A deal announced this week between the Motor Insurance Bureau and the DVLA will mean real-time checking of licence details, including motoring convictions. Malcolm Tarling of the Association of British Insurers explains.
We want to speed up and simplify the process by which people apply for motor insurance so that anyone proposing for motor insurance doesn't have to second guess what they need to declare and what they don't need to declare as far as driving history and convictions are concerned. We believe that this will also lead to more accurate risk pricing so that the premium you pay as far as possible reflects the risk you run, and also to help keep premiums down to identify people who deliberately fail to disclose convictions, because we'll be able to check whether or not they appear on the DVLA database.
And quite an extraordinary number of people do fail to disclose all their convictions, don't they?
Well, we did a data matching exercise with the DVLA, and around 16% of people had failed to disclose relevant information such as motoring convictions, but also a further 7% had actually over-declared, and these are the people that are probably paying too much for their insurance. So if we get the information correct, we can actually make sure that premiums reflect the risk, and this could lead to some motorists actually paying less for their motor insurance.
But will another change in the law, due to start soon, mean all those details are not used to assess the risk? After a certain time, most criminal convictions are spent and can't be referred to. At the moment, an offence for which there's just a fine, like speeding, is spent after 5 years. But from early next year, the new law will reduce the spent period to 12 months for a fine. So although your licence has motoring convictions going back up to 4 years or 11 years in serious cases, after a year you can legally deny that you've been fined for an offence. How will that conflict be resolved? Malcolm Tarling again.
We want to make sure that the only offences that we take into account are ones that are relevant to the risk and ones that the law allows us to.
So if an offence where you've been fined is spent after a year, even though it's on your licence and even though this data will be automatically picked up when you renew your insurance, it won't make any difference to the premium?
No, it should not, because insurers should be fully aware of the law and they should know which offences they can take into account even if they still appear on your driving licence.
It rather begs the question then of why that data appears if the convictions are spent.
Well, we don't have any control on the data that appears on your driving licences. That's really an issue for the DVLA. It's like at the moment where standard speeding convictions are actually disregarded for totting up purposes after 3 years, but they still remain on your driving licence for an additional year.
Malcolm Tarling, with me is Christopher Stacey. He's Director of Services at Unlock, the charity for people with convictions. Christopher Stacey, it would be odd, wouldn't it, if the DVLA continued to record a fine for speeding for up to 4 years, but it's spent after 1 year. How confident are you it won't be used, as Malcolm Tarling said?
Well, I think Malcolm's wrong in the information that he's giving, actually. Sadly, from our perspective, the insurance industry have pushed for an exemption to the changes that are coming in, which will mean that motoring offences won't become spent after a year in the instance of a fine. It would still take 5 years for it to become spent. So we've got two systems here. We've got a system of how long an endorsement remains on a licence, 4 years or 11 years. And we've got a separate system of how long it takes to become spent.
And so insurers will still be able to ask you if you've had a fine in the last 5 years, as they do at the moment in some cases?
Yes, they will be able to.
So even though a fine for other things disappears after 12 years, in a sense...
12 months, yeah.
12 months.
Yeah.
In this case, just of motoring, you say there's going to be an exemption?
Yes, that's something that the insurance industry have pushed for, and it doesn't make sense because it will then penalise people with motoring convictions when applying for things like employment.
Yes, but of course many people think it does make sense because, of course, if you have been speeding, they might think, well, after a year you might well do it again, but maybe after 5 years, if you haven't had one for 5 years, maybe you have changed your ways.
Yeah, I think it's an unfortunate way in which the Ministry of Justice are approaching it, which means that the exception will apply across the board, not just to motor insurance. To all convictions. Yes.
So I see. So even if you've been fined for a motoring offence, applying for other insurance, can that really affect you? If I apply for contents insurance, does it matter if I've been fined for speeding?
Whether it matters is an important question. I think most mainstream insurers will still take convictions that are unspent into account, and they will have blanket policies, which they tend to have, which is not to insure anybody who has unspent convictions.
Right. So if I apply for contents insurance or buildings cover or travel insurance even, the fact that I've got a motoring offence can last for 5 years and could affect my premium, even though that really seems nothing to do with the insurance.
Yes, absolutely. And that goes back to the key question of relevancy. So I can absolutely understand that motoring convictions for motor insurance for a period of up to 5 years, that may well be relevant, but for other types it's questionable.
And what about things like fraud? Because the period for that is being reduced as well, isn't it? I mean, it's going to be spent, if you've had a short prison sentence even, it'll be spent after 4 years. Will you be able to say, I haven't had that conviction, when you come to get something for which fraud might be relevant, like a contents policy?
So once it's spent, you do not have to declare it for applying for things like insurance or employment. So the date of 4 years will start from the end of the sentence. So it'll be 4 years from the end of the sentence of a prison sentence of, say, 12 months.
This is going to be quite a big change for the insurance industry then.
It will, and I think we want to be sure that insurers are not taking into account spent convictions, and while the DVLA have assured us that they will set up a system, they're still clear to us at this point that they haven't worked out exactly how to do that.
Stacey, thanks of Unlock, and the MOJ couldn't tell us when the changes will begin, but we think it'll be fairly soon.